You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to Kerry Greenaway and Mark Manley on the Dark Mirror Paranormal Show, only on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening and welcome to the Dark Mirror Paranormal Show. My name is Kerry Greenaway and tonight I am joined in the studio by my lovely Cole Hutchinson and Marcus Manius. Good evening, laddios.
Good evening. I am not Kerry Greenaway.
And
I know I'm not Mark Manley.
Yeah, definitely not. Definitely not. I don't think the high-vis jacket would look good on you.
Well, I don't know, Mark.
I think
I could rock that look.
We're all going. We can rock that look.
I better take it off. How are you all? Is everybody okay?
Yeah. Good. You recovered from last weekend?
I enjoyed last weekend. That's the first time I've done it in 2 years. And he hastens to add lead a group for a paranormal investigation.
No, we had fun. It was like a bit of a mini Parasearch Radio team presenter get together. So it was good fun.
It was. It was nice meeting Gemma and everybody as well.
Yeah.
And you, young man.
Yes, and you, myself.
Oh, and before I forget, I know it's totally nothing to do with this, we need to have a Dark Mirror party when I'm down in Essex in April.
We do. I haven't told anybody else about that yet because I need to check my shifts. But
can we make it's when I get back because I'm away for 9 days from the 3rd.
Ooh, well, we'll see. Anyway,
we'll
let's all sort our social lives out. Let's talk about what we're going to be talking about tonight. We are talking all about remote viewing, aren't we, lads?
Well, I found that a bit boring, remote viewing, because to be absolutely honest, I was sat there for ages with the Sky remote in my hand and I didn't find anything interesting in it.
No, you can sit there for hours, can't you?
Exactly. It's just a piece of plastic, you know.
Just a piece of plastic.
A bit of plastic in your hand can certainly interest.
Pardon?
Anyway, so what is remote viewing? Well, remote viewing is the trained ability to acquire even accurate, direct knowledge not available to the ordinary senses of locations, things, and events. Now, these are distant in time or space from the remote viewer and can be in the past, present, or the future. What do we make of that?
Mark.
He's frozen on us.
Okay, I'll take that then. Either that or I was going to say Mark seems to be very happy on the shot
I know, he's just gone...
He looks really happy. Yeah, it's an interesting subject because over the years, there's so many people that have done this, remote viewing, and from Joe Public to governments that have used it. So it is quite an interesting thing about you can be in a certain location, you can then think and imagine, and then you're in that location, and the amount of times that people have documented what they saw and then they tied it in with what actually was in that location. They're doing experiments and there was more and more hits. So it's an interesting subject.
It is interesting, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why is when I was researching this, and I'm sure you lads found the same thing when you looked into this. It is... Mark?
Yes.
Oh, you are there. I was wondering,
Yeah.
where you gone?
No, the Skype just went, see ya! And completely cut out, and I went frantic and was swearing like mad, and then came back in and just sat here and let Carl carry on talking.
Oh, right, okay. The thing, so going back to the point of when I was researching this, and I'm sure you lads felt the same, it is packed full of conspiracy theories, weird and wacky stories, all sorts of weird stuff. Now, you can understand why, because the actual experiments that they were doing are quite out there. But basically, what the experiments were doing were working under a strict scientific protocol with remote viewing, which is basically psi theory, isn't it? It's psi.
It's the one I take seriously-ish is the Project Stargate, which, for people who don't know, was remote viewing experiments that were conducted by the CIA in the 70s, 80s, and I think it went up to the early 90s. And I happened to get the released, what do you call those documents?
Redacted documents.
Redacted documents. Thank you very much, young man.
There are
From the CIA.
133 million of those.
Yeah, I only got a few.
Thank God, because he sent them all to me. I was like, God, there better not be 133 million of them. Bloody
I sent them to both of you.
My email was going ping, 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 ping.
The one thing that gets me with this is that I find that the one thing that piques my interest in this was the Martian one. Because
we'll come to that. We'll come to that.
Well, normally I only ever see stuff.
That's a lot further along.
I've just got to say that those who do remote viewing, some of the things that I see, the only time I would ever see anything like that is if I'm sat in a cafe in Denmark and I've had some space cake. I'm just saying. All right.
But we'll talk about that in a bit, because there's so much to this that happened, because it did start way back in 1972. And we're going to go through it basically with you. But first of all, the protocols for remote viewing, which were basically the strict guidelines that were needed to make the experiments relevant, I suppose you'd use that word, were outlined through a series of experiments. Now, these are the protocols. First of all, the remote viewing data is recorded in some format, so it's either written, audio taped, or videotaped. Mm-hmm. It's got to be double blind, so the person giving the answers does not know the question, and the person in control of the experiment doesn't know either. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't know the location. It is literally a set of coordinates or something that's been given in an envelope to the person, who then gives them to the remote viewer, but neither of them have got any clue of what these coordinates could be. They could be next door, they could be 100 miles away, they could be on a different planet, they could be anywhere.
Or a brothel in Llandudno.
It's not. It's not.
Oh, David Thomas, you bloody fool! You could have had a bit of.
And it's not just in the present time. It could be at any point in time or space, right? So time or longitude, latitude, time, second, anything like that. So it's really like that, and also feedback. This was the other thing. So although you can be psychic about anything, in order to validate the data, it has to be at least partially correct. So if they're remote viewing for the future, then that will be validated when that happens, if that happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I do agree that with that does have to be double blind, because I mean otherwise you could just anything like certain very famous psychics do occasionally.
Yeah, cold read and everything. You have that scenario, and I think the double blind scenario means there's more triggers and there's more controls over the situation. So it's interesting. It's something which I'd sort of read about before, but when I did the research and looking at the stuff that Mark sent, Kerry sent, and that I picked up, it starts opening so many different boxes and many different scenarios, and you're thinking you end up as Kerry scenario, you end up going down the rabbit hole.
Oh,
Do you know
God,
one
yeah.
thing that amazed me about this is, you know, straight away when I read this and I read one of the things, I got the link straight away to aliens! But,
Really?
you know, there
Did
you go, we have
I
it.
was surprised.
Yes! Yes! I got it in early.
I tried
That's
so
what she
bloody
said.
hard to keep that goddamn word out of this goddamn show.
That remote viewing.
Yeah,
You know?
Kerry, I want to break it to you. It's the Dark Mirror show. Get used to it.
I
It's not-
try every
Mark's
week. Carl.
singing. Mark's not there. I'm going to be bringing in the aliens routine.
Anyway,
The audience love it, so...
But no, going back to it, but you've got this whole scenario of somebody that is blindfolded, and they're being asked questions, and there's
Oh, that's
somebody
50
else
Shades of Grey, mate.
in a different location, and they're asking about this, that, and the other, and the correlation between the data that was produced over so many different experiments and times that did it. There's too many hits that happened.
Yeah.
however, I will say, out of all the thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of documents that there were released on this particular project, a lot of it was blacked out. So a lot of it is still... It's almost like they went, yeah, we did a project, we shut it down, here's the information, but we're not going to actually tell you much.
Yeah, but that also brings in the conspiracy theorist guys. That when you've got the same thing, it's the same thing about the Kennedy assassination. It's about the moon landing, about Roswell. Everybody dedact. So it's loads of black markers through all the interesting stuff. So you read between the lines.
Of course.
So you read the documents and you go, okay, and you read something, and all of a sudden you've got 3 or 4 paragraphs that are blacked out. And then you
If
join
you
it
just
up
pick
again.
up the word
You're
toast
basically
and
going,
summer day.
hang on, I'm going to basically join the dots.
Yeah. True.
It was an odd summer's day. She made toast in her negligee. And that's how you can get out of it sometimes, yes.
Oh, exactly. So I looked into this, and it basically started in 1972 with a guy called H.E. Puthoff.
I love his name. What's your name? Put off. What? What's put you off? What's up, mate? No, put...
Now, he was actually looking for a grant to research quantum biology, and the proposal was widely circulated to get this grant through various universities and places like that. And a New York artist who was actually working at another site, which was Baxter, I believe it was, saw it. Now, he contacted Puthoff. I'm not quite sure. Is it
Puthoff
or
Puthoff.
Puthoff?
Just put off.
Puthoff. And suggested...
Puthoff.
And suggested...
That's going to be the show now. Put her off. Come on, let's get Kerry put off. Aliens.
Oh
off
my
in there.
God! Anyway, what he wanted to research was the boundary between the physics of the animate and inanimate, and should consider experiments of the parapsychological type. Now, Swan apparently had successful experiments in psychokinesis, right?
Reading things with his head.
So they got Chain,
Scanners.
and Puthoff invited Swan to visit him at the SRI, which is the Stanford Research Institute.
So, hang on.
Just for a little bit of tidbit, the Stanford Paranormal Research is basically the background to the original Ghostbusters film. That's where they sort of potentially started.
Ghostbusters.
Just want to put that out there because it's common ground now.
Do you know what? Totally going off the thread for a second. I put on my Facebook earlier. I've realised something. I've got a metal leg, I teach kickboxing, and I'm a paranormal investigator. Can you imagine what DC or Marvel character I would be? I would be freaking awesome. I'd be the Ghostbuster or with the Mostbuster. I tell you.
I saw that, and I was thinking. I was trying to put these characters. Initially, I was thinking Iron Man, but then again, Iron Man's awesome. You're not.
What are we talking
Oh well,
about?
go and yourself, young man.
Well, you've gone off into an alternate reality over there,
Thinking
didn't you?
Cyclops.
Sorry, what was that, Carl?
I'm thinking Mark's more Cyclops, more machine than human.
Okay.
Cyborg. There you go.
Anyway.
I'm Cyborg.
Yeah, exactly.
Back to Stanford Research Institute.
Sorry.
Puthoff.
Kerry, it would not be the Dark Mirror show without aliens being shouted out and without going completely off topic and then coming back onto it again. And just making you put your glasses up on your head, put your hands on your feet, take your head off my body, do
Why
it again.
have we got these two people on the show?
Anyway, right, I'm going to just keep talking over them. Right, he hired a magnetometer that's actually used in quark detection. That was actually in the physics department. But anyway, he borrowed it. And he got Swan in and he hid it. Well, he didn't really hide it. It was in the room below him. And Swan then proceeded to draw a picture of the machine, which was unpublished. So it's not like he'd been able to research this, and told him its location. Now, Puthoff was a bit amazed by this and actually wrote a report and circulated it around the scientific community. Right? Thought nothing more of it. Thought, oh, yeah, it was quite an interesting little experiment. Write a little report, off you go. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, 2 CIA men arrived at the SRI with that report. Now, spoke to Puthoff and advised of, the Soviets and the Cold War. You've got to remember the time that this was all happening. And they advised him that the Soviets were putting a hell of a lot of resources into parapsychology. And he wondered if he would want to take on a low-key study, which was external of the intelligence community, but funded by it, regards to this.
Can I just point something out initially before we carry on that thread?
Oh, are we going to go back to Ghostbusters?
No. This is
He slimed me.
But the Russians or the CCP or the whatever you want to call it at that particular moment, they, as a state, they put more research into the paranormal in various different elements than any other country in the world.
Yeah,
that's all I was just going to say.
They put an extraordinary amount of money into it. Or allegedly. See, I have a little conspiracy theory on that. We'll come to conspiracies, I'm sure, at some point. Anyway, I kind of wonder sometimes if the Russians or whoever say, "Oh, I know, let's wind up the old Americans and put out various reports saying this," and they haven't done anything of the sort. And then the Americans go, "We've got to get on this bandwagon," and off they go.
They both.
But to be honest, Kerry, you can be probably right because propaganda and everything like that. You put something out that gets leaked. Somebody then picks it up in the US government, in the whatever you want, and all of a sudden they're going down that rabbit hole to look at stuff.
Look at the Philadelphia experiment.
Same thing about the space race. The Russians got up there first with Yuri Gagarin or the monkey or whatever you want to call it, going around, and then obviously the landing on the moon and all the space race. So,
can I just say something? I know something about the very first part of the space race that not a lot of people know. Is that when they actually sent the astronauts up there and the starting gun went off, everybody died because there was no air, and it was just silly. I just thought I'd say that.
Yeah, but what happened to there was the monkey first? The monkey was the Russians' first thing up there.
And that poor thing was basically left up in the ship, and it
hasn't come down.
It's still floating around.
And it's still going round and round and round.
Yeah, but the monkey's long gone. Well, it's just a pile of bones in there now, but...
Well, you don't know, because obviously how does
the
body...
Nobody came first, second or third, so there were no winners in that race.
Anyway, pulling it back to topic. Jesus, I knew this was going to happen tonight. Simple
Kerry, you've got bald clumps where you're ripping your hair out.
Mate, seriously.
There was a dog. There was a dog, Ashley Nib, yes.
Anyway... Simple experiments first took place between Puthoff and Swan, and it was basically what's in the box. What's in the box?
Oh, the famous thing that's gone on for years.
Yeah, you see it to this day, don't you?
It's like the whole thing. It's the Schrodinger box. If a cat's dead inside the box, is it dead if you can't see it?
Well, you need Mr. Swan, Ingo Swan, because he'll be able to tell you if the cat was alive or dead.
This is very, very true.
Which is true.
We have 2 cats and 3 dogs.
Anyway, the results from these basic experiments were actually quite impressive. And they put together a budget, which was around $50,000, which is quite small. Right?
Well, back then,
For 8 months, basically.
That's a good 4 days in Vegas.
A pilot study. At this point, a gentleman named Russell Tugg joined the research team. That's a famous name, right?
Yeah.
You're waving at me.
No, I'm waving at...
Somebody's waving at you.
I can't see you.
You can't see me.
Oh, right. Anyway, show's on. Now, the experiment progressed to sending a team member to a location in the San Francisco area, and then they started to go a bit further. And it was, they worked through these experiments. Various methods were revised and refined, and then the protocols that we outlined at the beginning of the show were outlined, and that's what they worked to, throughout the rest of the experiments.
Which has those guidelines and things have gone through the years and years and years, going from then to now.
Yeah.
You always do it if you're going to do it, and the CIA has been a major influx of the whole thing from then to now.
They make good close CIA.
There's many other bureaus around, but there's also governments that have done it and everything like that. There's backs. When you look at it and you think, okay, there's things that happen and people are in different scenarios across different countries that have done this. Not the USA, the UK, Russia, France, Germany. They've all had these same experiments that they're doing.
Except America has released their findings, or some of their findings, should I say.
So, South America, Brazil in particular, they've released a lot of their UFO and far-reading stuff, and a lot of it's not redacted either. And one thing I've got to say about the CIA, I remember they used to have clothes outlets all over the place in the 80s and 90s. They did good ski jackets. Whatever happened to them?
Anyway, basically...
Oh, no, that's CNA, wasn't
Within the viewers... They actually incorporated some CIA operatives, like people from the CIA, basically, who took part in this. Now, basically, it was done as a standard to see if anyone could do it. They weren't proved as psychic or anything beforehand. They wanted to make sure that there was no trickery, test the protocols, that sort of thing. Now, it was very impressive and showed a high rate of success under these controlled conditions. And because it was such a success, Swan suggested that they take it a step further and that he actually remote viewed Jupiter. Now, this was just ahead of NASA Pioneer 10's flyby.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's not just doing it he's doing it for future. He's actually remote viewing future as well as off-planet, as well as, it brings a lot of things into it. Can you do it anywhere? Is it limited by distance? Clearly not, because he did it for Jupiter. Now, he suggested, when he did his thing, his viewing, he stated that there was a ring around Jupiter. And all the scientists and cosmologists and astronauts and all those people were like, no, what's he talking about? However, when Pioneer 10 did its flyby, Jupiter did in fact show it had a ring.
The famous rings.
That's right.
So that's pretty astounding. But nobody on the planet knew that.
Well, yeah, because you look at it, this guy was before the flyby, before there was ability to use telescopes to see it and all this sort of stuff. This guy basically sat in a room and said, I'm on Jupiter, there's a ring around the planet, which is meteors, and it looks like a ring around the planet, and blah, 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 blah. And then shortly after, they get something back from Pioneer, they get something back from this, that, and the other, and whatever. And yes, Jupiter has rings around it.
I bet they were all a bit mind blown.
Yeah, but could that be coincidence that he's thinking, what's the weirdest thing I could possibly say that possibly is not going to be true? And he's just going to say, I'll tell you what, there's going to be rings around the planet.
So basically back then, he'd been listening to Beyonce.
Has rings. And he says it, and then Jesus, he's landed the lottery, and he's correct.
If you love her, put a ring on it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, as Beyonce says, and all the Spice Girls says, put a ring on it, and you're going to find it. So
anyway, this evolved the experiments into remote viewing, and they actually went to coordinated viewing. Now, this comes under the SCANAT experiments, basically.
Yeah.
what do you call these things? Scanat. It was another program. Now this is basically where they scanned
I love
or
the
reviewed
names.
Scanat, which
Like
basically means
real
scanning
free.
by coordinate. Now basically, the geographical coordinates are provided to the team by the responsible peoples for threat analysis. So by threat analysis, big bods. And it's latitude, longitude, in degrees, minutes, and seconds. They used two readers. The readers were Ingo Swan and Pat Price. Now, the actual details of the site were not revealed to the SRI team nor the readers, hence the double blind thing, right? So they're just given this information. That's it. Now, there were operatives within the test installation. So the threat analysis people basically had people in the installation that they wanted these guys to remote view. So they knew certain information about it, drawings, codes, data.
Yeah.
And then they got the guys to read. What they read was then forwarded to the threat analysis. The people from the site forwarded information to the threat analysis people. The results were compared.
Compare the market.
They did. They compared.
There you go. I got you to laugh.
I've been laughing a lot. But they were still classified. It's still classified because it's still under the threat analysis banner. So the guys who read will never know whether they were right or wrong, and the people that were actually in the site would never know. The reader, no one knew apart from the threat analysis guys. Okay. Now, the result of these experiments was very interesting. And it really got everyone very excited and really increased the interest in the field. So they wanted to go a bit further with this. Now, Pat Price himself, he's a bit of an enigma, is old Pat Price. And there's a whole conspiracy just on Pat Price himself. But he then went on and he just did a little personal experiment, did old Pat, and thought, oh, this sounds like fun, I know. I'll tell you what, I'm going to have a look at the Soviet equivalent of the site that we've just read for. And he managed to find, or he located, in the URL, information that was actually verified by the threat analysis people. But he did this off his own back. He just sort of went and did it.
Yeah.
That's a bit
We're listening to your
arrogant.
story. Carry on.
Do you not feel that that's a little arrogant?
No, not really, because I can guarantee there was somebody in the Russian side doing exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the Cold War back then, it was tit for tat, tit for tat, tit for tat.
When you come down to the governments, when it comes down to each government and you're using it as a military, because at the end of the day, CIA is down to one thing only, and that's bettering their country for their own gain. You guarantee that, flip that on the Russian side, they're going to be doing exactly the same. Britain's going to be doing exactly the same. So you've got CIA, MI5, KGB, Mossad, Burger King, exactly. Just making sure what special source is all about.
Well, they have Project Grill
there's
Flames.
all these different scenarios, so everybody will be doing exactly the same.
I must admit, my dad.
The thing that interests me a little bit is you've got people that looking at this, that CIA did, that the Russians did, and they produced records where they remote viewed on themselves. So they were looking at the American side, and the Americans were looking at the Russian side, and there was links between certain data points and certain scenarios that happened at the same time, and they were picking up on the same things.
Well, that's one of the things that's been said about Pat Price, was that he was a double agent.
Yeah, exactly.
That's one thing that was said about him.
I was about to say that in the Cold War, in the late 60s and early 70s, my dad was working for Whitehall then, MI6, and he didn't tell me a lot what was going on, but he did say that back then there was lots and lots of very strange, weird budgets going out for this, that, and the other secret experiments, but it was classed as such and such, and it was just covered up, and you weren't allowed to talk about it. He never told me anything, but I'd love to know.
That's any government. They all
all around the world.
They have their public view. Yeah. They have this public view. Then they have their sort of public view, which everybody knows about, and then they try to hide everything else, which everybody, conspiracy people and everything, will know about, because everybody knows and jumps to conclusions and as we're doing this show tonight. It's just like what's done.
It wouldn't be the Dark Mirror show if you didn't.
Is interesting because if there's proven information about it, it's been happening for years.
Oh, God,
so you could look at the Americans remote viewing the Russians during the Cuba crisis before they were going to launch the nuclear deterrent, because
because that happened before 1972.
There's actually a very famous conspiracy theory to do with that, but we'll touch on that some of the time.
Yeah, but all I'm saying is if this is rife during that particular area that everybody was doing it on everybody else, everybody knew what everybody else was going to do anyway. So it was going to play out the way it was going to play out.
Well, if they're watching you, watching you, then you know what they're going to do. And it's a bit like a game of chess. Yeah, it's like a game of chess where you already know the first move.
Exactly.
Well, anyway, Pat Price was actually only at this point done those 2 experiments. So his involvement with, Russia and all that side of things, I have to say, would probably not really be now. It would probably be later on in the story, because it was only after those first 2 experiments he showed his aptitude, I suppose, for it, that they then invited him to continue with the program. Now, this went on for a couple of years. Now, in 1974, the CIA actually challenged the program to continue remote viewing for Soviet sites of operational significance. So actually, this is happening. Well, all the things you're talking about happened way before this actually started happening.
Yeah.
Now, the site they actually focused on to start with was a place called Semipalatinsk. There.
Semipalatinsk.
Now, this was
Russian.
an unidentified research centre. It wasn't. They knew obviously what it was, but that's what they identified it as. It was an unidentified research centre. It's nothing. We're just going to get you to have a little nose, see what you can come up with, kind of thing. Now, it was carried out in 3 phases. One was with the geographical coordinates, and all they were told was it was an R&D site, research and development site. Now, the outcome for the first phase was drawings of a multi-storey crane that was situated at the site. Now, this was corroborated, and interesting enough, they went on to do a phase 2. Now, again, the participants, who knew general knowledge of the site but nothing specific, focused on verifiable physical data. So they had people on the site who knew some stuff, so we've gone on to the second stage of it, right? And they came up with some more verifiable data. And it was been independently reviewed, so, you know. Then phase 3 was unverifiable data. So they were looking for things like important documents, cipher machines, all that kind of thing that might be within this location of the remote viewers. Now, this really, really excited the intelligence and government communities.
Oh, they got a little chubby over it. They really did.
Mm-hmm.
They got
very excited. And this is when the program itself was hugely expanded. Ed May joins the team. That's another famous name in the remote viewing programs. And they started basically outsourcing and using remote viewings for all sorts of things. Outsourcing, basically. NASA started using them, which is where Russell Targ came in. They looked at remote viewing, or, seeing about electronic random number generators, whether that could be detected by remote viewing. Studies by the Naval Electronic Systems Command, which was to do with submarines.
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of things. So it just wasn't focused on threat analysis all of a sudden. It sort of went bonkers and branched out into lots of different areas. Is there any limits to these remote viewing? Let's give it a go. I feel it would kind of was a scenario.
I think that is, you just hit the nail on the head, Kerry, is if this was legitimate, where you could remote view on anything at any time that you want to do. So whether it's the President of the USA's bedroom or the government, this, that, Area 51, NASA, anywhere that the Russians wanted to view, they could view it if that is the case.
Mm-hmm. But they reviewed a lot of these studies or the projects were actually client-based. And they're still classified. So we don't know really the outcome of those because they're not under the government banner, as it were. They're classed as client-based. Now, a lot of the cases to do with threat analysis to the United States, because of Carter and his releasing of information, that's how come we know so much about the rest of it, because a lot of it was released in these documents and this is what's been picked apart. And the information I actually got, I'd love to say I spoke to him. I didn't speak to him at all, but I got a first-hand account from Puthoff himself. So,
did you use remote viewing to do it?
I did. I actually did a little bit of remote viewing, and this is where all this information has come from, everybody. How awesome am I?
Oh, dear.
You heard it here first, guys. Now, the project continued for a further 14 years with some huge successes, but there were also some huge failures. So there's a very big split as to whether or not it was a worthwhile project or whether or not it wasn't, right?
Yes.
Then we hit 1977. Now, this is where it all gets very confusing in regards to basically the intelligence and the army.
It was the psycho section of it.
Yeah, which is the big conspiracy area.
And they have weird names for lots of projects that cross over and get muddled up and confusing, and all happens under soldier. And this is where soldiers come into it and generals come into it, and lots of army type people get involved at this stage, don't they?
Because of one reason only, and that is the ability that if you can remote view, you can remote view on your enemies to see their weaknesses, their this, that, and the other. So it becomes a military aspect to it. And if you can,
it would make for a brilliant asset as well.
Exactly, it's an asset, and you can control it. You're going to put money in towards it to basically build up and realise it and look into it more, etc., etc. It's the same thing about anything in the world. Once it becomes military, the money floods in, but the conspiracy then goes up and up and up and up.
Mm-hmm.
Because...
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying that as soon, like you say, comes to a certain point in 1972, 73, 74, where all of a sudden it comes from sort of lowbrow investigation to all of a sudden there's a spike.
Well, Gondola's wish was in 1977, and this was basically to evaluate the potential applications of remote viewing under basically army intelligence.
Yeah, because they basically want to know the codes to their missiles, and they want to know where they are, what their captains, their whatever. Yeah. So.
Can I just say something? Almost like a remote viewing battleship scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I just say something? I'm ex-British Army, and you've just used two words, army and intelligence in the same sentence, and I take great offence at that.
Well, okay,
anyway,
I'm sorry.
It became formalised as Grill Flame in the mid-1978s, and this all took place at Fort Meade. Basically, it was involving soldiers and civilians who believed to possess varying degrees of natural psychic ability. And the SRI program, which we were talking about earlier, was integrated into Grill Flame in 1979.
And this is when the whole thing about the US military, and I know it's going to sound weird, and I don't want to do it, but Mark's going to kick my what's it if I don't mention it. But at that time, they were also, while they were doing that, they were also trying to make goats fall asleep.
Yes, telekinesis and psychic abilities,
which is potentially the same subject in the same range of what we're talking about.
Yeah, it was. It was all to do with the same department. The men who could make goats faint.
Yeah.
an actual real thing of people staring at animals until they passed out.
Yeah. And if anybody's watched the film, you watch the official documentation. That's basically what happened. Somebody sat
there and stared at them.
The goat stared at it and tried to make it fall asleep or fall over.
I might try that later with my dog.
But it was also the same department was also doing the same research when it came to remote viewing, which they thought they could do. They could incorporate both aspects, i.e., if they could make somebody or a goat fall asleep, they could also then remote view and make somebody else
as a weapon.
Asleep.
And this is the same department that used LSD as well. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, and throughout this time, hundreds of experiments of remote viewing were carried out through and through under grill flame. Now, in 1983, the program was redesignated.
Do you think it was a bad idea?
To the Inscombe Centre Lane project. And a columnist named Jack Anderson in 1984 actually reported it. He actually put it out there. Now, basically, as soon as that hit the media, the National Academy of Sciences, National Research Council, evaluated the remote viewing program for the Army Research Institute, and it was unfavourable. So the
basically went, you're mad. You're mad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the Army went, fair point, we'll stop the program.
But did they?
Well, they didn't. Because it was redesignated.
They redesignated it and changed it.
I love that. They redesignated
Funny
it.
enough, the American Army said they'd stop something and didn't stop it.
No.
Funny enough, conspiracy.
They just called it a different name. They called it Sunstreak.
Yeah.
Transferred it to the DIA, Scientific and Technical Intelligence Directorate. We even had an office code. The DIA's Scientific and Technical Intelligence Directorate. It's a mouthful, isn't it?
It is a mouthful, but that's for another story.
Mm-hmm. It got basically transitioned to the Science Applications International Corporation in 1991 and was renamed Stargate.
Yes! Project Stargate.
When did the show Stargate come out?
1992, I think, or 4. 2 or 4.
Funny that.
What, you mean saying that mainstream aliens
do you think it was a misdirection then? Everyone suddenly started thinking they'd found this stone circle thing that spun around and transported you to different dimensions.
Well, actually, the first ever bit of it was about one that was found in the Antarctic, and the first ever book about it was about one that was found in the Antarctic.
And the Egyptians and the Mayas, that both have the same. As me and Mark were talking about last weekend, there's so many links between ancient Egypt, the Mayans, all these different major
civilizations and religions
that have the same thing to do about sun gods, and we were talking about this last weekend, geeky out, basically, aliens and stuff. But there's so many links between these different environments that have the same links as sun gods, the blah 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 blah.
And now Antarctica's had all the presidents of all the countries going over in secret meeting.
Why not the American military go, tell you what, let's put a program out about what we've been researching and think, hey, these guys aren't going to realise what we're doing.
We could be being remote viewed upon now. I mean, I could look up somebody's remote viewing and I could tweak my right nipple at them, and they're going to just get totally put off and start laughing, and that's the end of their experiment. So,
over 2 decades, they reckon $20 million was spent on Stargate and related activities. The $11 million budget from the mid-1980s.
Why can't they spend that on our radio show? We could just do it for them.
Over 40 personnel allegedly served in the program at various times, including around 23 remote viewers.
Mm-hmm.
In the mid-1980s, the program included as many as 7 full-time viewers, and you can imagine how many support staff there were.
But
there's
Gary,
also another...
Going back to what you've just said, where would these 7 full-time remote people based.
23.
Yeah, where were they based?
Fort Meade.
Mm-hmm. Fort Meade, big military base.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they think they actually were based?
Oh, God knows. Yeah, they're in everywhere, I would have thought.
Mark.
Are you talking about Area 51, 52 or Cheyenne Mountain?
Oh, God.
I would say a mixture of both, really. Because you're going to say, oh, they're there, when they're actually over there. Misdirection is what we're talking about.
Anyway, so...
What do you mean, anyway? I'm putting the point across. Jesus.
Aliens!
Aliens!
Oh, God. So I found some instances where they're supposed to have been good, right? And some where they weren't, right? So a remote viewer was tasked to locate a Soviet Tu-95 bomber, which had crashed somewhere in Africa. He allegedly did this within several miles of the actual wreckage.
Was that the Russians doing all that? Was that the
Oh,
Americans?
this is the Americans.
So they knew where it was, so they found it, and then they said, oh, we actually found it 7 miles away. They'd stripped it down, got the information out of it, and then said it's somewhere else.
Booyah, sucks, you Soviets. We know where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had such a British London accent.
Yeah.
Second World War London accent there. Yeah, we know what it is.
I can just imagine that general in the US government going,
Ladies and gentlemen, President of America. All right.
The National, in 1979, the National Security Council asked about a Soviet submarine under construction. The viewer reported that a very large new submarine with 18 to 20 missile launch tubes and a large flat area at the aft end would be launched in 100 days. 2 subs, one with 24 launch tubes and the other with 20 launch tubes and a large flat aft deck, were reportedly sighted in 120 days.
Aircraft carrier.
That's quite impressive.
It is. That's impressive, yes.
That is
I'll
impressive.
give you that.
Mm-hmm. One assignment included locating kidnapped B.G. James L. Dozier.
Jeez.
Is that Brigadier?
Yes.
Who had been kidnapped by the Red Brigades in Italy in 1981. He was freed by Italian police after 42 days, apparently without help from the psychics. According to the news reports, anyway.
They're Italian. They were just running around waving their arms in the air. Hey, che bella, you know?
La pizza, la mizzabili.
Italian police said that they were assisted by the United States State and Defence, but they didn't actually have any help from psychics. They used electronic surveillance equipment.
That kind of poo-poo.
So did they or didn't they is the answer on that one.
Did they? Or, as the conspiracy theorists would say, is that just a false flag put out there?
Oh, God. Another assignment included hunting Gaddafi down before the 1986 bombing of Libya, but Gaddafi was not injured in the bombings.
I'm glad you said bombings there. And in the Marine Corps, what was that? Asked where Marine Corps Colonel William Higgins was being held in Lebanon. This was in 1988. And a remote viewer stated that Higgins was in a specific building in a specific South Lebanon village, and a released hostage later said to have claimed that Higgins had probably been in that building at that time.
Well, there you go. So that's just some of the cases that they're supposed to have looked at. There are a lot more, but we're not going to go into it now. Basically,
I love
goes
the name
on and
of one
on.
of these people.
Now, I know the one that you want to talk about because you mentioned it right at the top of the show, which was a viewer called Joseph McMonigle.
McGonagall. Oh, Joseph McMonigle. McMonigle! Yeah.
McMonigle. Now, he was one.
McMonigle.
Yeah, he was one of the key group of remote viewers in the CIA that focused on military targets. But he got a bit bored with that. So he then
I've
decided...
actually got the transcript of that particular session on my laptop in front of me.
Well, it happened in 1984, so why don't you tell everybody what happened?
Basically, he was handed an envelope, and it was 5 inches by 3 inches, and he wasn't allowed to open it. He just said put his hands on it, and then do his thing, do his stuff, and zoom off to wherever he thought these things were. He knew certain coordinates, but he didn't know when or where. He just knew the numbers. So he did this. And then basically started off with, he had the coordinates were 40.89 degrees north by 9.55 degrees west. All he was told. And he was told, focus on the envelope, blah, blah, blah. And basically the guy is like, oh, this is the first bit. I won't read it all because it'd take forever. I want to say it looks like, I don't know, it sort of looks, I kind of got an oblique view of a pyramid or pyramid form. It's very high. It's kind of sitting in a large depressed area, and it's yellowish or ochre coloured. And that was the first bit. But to cut a long story short, basically, inside the envelope on the card was written, the planet Mars, time of interest approximately 1 million years BC. And this guy basically, allegedly, and also according to the documentation, because this was all recorded, did go back to 1 million BC, just before the planet Mars turned into a dust bowl. And he basically saw the remnants of that civilization. They'd already sent off a load of their civilization into space to find another planet to be able to live on, and this, that, and the other. And the remainders that were left behind, they were waiting for the others to come back once they had found the planet, but they never came back. But like I say, there's a lot of long-winded stuff, but there's a lot of really, really interesting and intricate detail. Like another set of coordinates that were given to him was like, this time, stay in the time level you're at, then move to 46.45 north by 353.22 east. And then he's gone, oh, I'm deep inside a cavern. No, not a cavern, more like a canyon. I'm looking up the sides of a steep wall that seemed to go on forever. And there's like, what is that? A structure with it's like the wall of the canyon has been carved. I'm getting very large structures, intricate, huge sections of smooth stone, blah, 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 blah. He goes on to describe the beings that are there. And they were aware he was reading them, according to this documentation. These aliens! Hey! I can actually say that legitimately. They were apparently aware this guy was reading them, but they couldn't say what it was or focus on anything. They just knew something was going on. And he described them as like stupidly tall, all lived in like these weird pyramid-shaped buildings and things, but they had buggered their atmosphere up, and that's why all this was going on. But that brings you strangely back to the program Stargate, where they say that the pyramids, Baramads, as Zahi Hawass says, Baramads, were actually spaceships, and they were aliens, which ties in nicely with the fact that they called it Project Stargate before Stargate, the program, came out. And there's aliens, all aliens. And what did we have on Earth?
Funny enough, where they said this happened was a certain place called Shannon Mountain, which was the major story loop of Stargate, the movie, and then the TV series.
That's right. And what I'll do is I'll send you guys this file I've got, because the more you read it, it's fascinating. Some of it I think, my God, what was he smoking? But when you look at it, some of this stuff I don't think you would just come out with. I really, really do not think you would just come out with it. Like, he's describing channels in the ground, and where you could see there used to be water that had made these channels and this, that, and the other. And he's talking about big squares moving left, right, and centre, but it was a part of a building that was moving and everything like that. It's very bizarre, but it's a bit like roadkill. You just got to look at it, Makes for very, very interesting reading.
Yeah, and you just have to draw your own conclusions to it then.
Here it is. Right, this is the bit where it says about them being aware, the Martians being aware of him reading them. All right, before you leave this individual, ask him if there's any way that you, or should I say, ask him if he knows who you are, and is there any way you can help him in his present predicament? Because this is one of the guys Martians who was supposedly worrying. And the guy who's the reader, he's like, all I get is that they just wait. He doesn't know who I am. I think he perceives me as a hallucination or something. So, make your own conclusions from that.
Yeah. You're like little pigs in shit, ain't ya? Happy as Larry with this.
Well, because the problem you've got, Kerry, is you can look at this and you can bring all conclusions down to one thing.
Which is?
Is it fact or is it not fact? Two scenarios. And one of the scenarios is if it's not fact and there's these legitimate experiments that have been taken by multiple governments doing these remote viewings, blah 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 blah. There's that they do it in they do it in the world, but then all of a sudden they're going, okay, we've done it in around the world. Let's see if we can go further afield.
Sorry, my Skype cut out. I'm back in the room, so I have no idea what you were saying. You were pulling faces at me.
I was just agreeing with what you were saying, Mark. Sorry.
And was Kerry doing the you stupid boys?
No, I
Yeah,
wasn't.
basically.
I wasn't.
Much, yeah.
I'm interested. Oh my god! So
I find it an interesting case, but I don't necessarily believe everything that's come out with. Some of it does make me think, why would you say that? Because of the intricate details on some of the things. A lot of it, I think, is yeah, right, mate. But some of it has got that factor, you know.
Well, the interesting thing that I'm gonna go way off fucking planet. Oh, sorry, I'm gonna go way off. I'm sorry. Why,
ladies and gentlemen, the Dark Mirror.
End up swearing. I do apologise.
Every Friday, it's you with your aliens and him with his expletives.
What I was just trying to say is, if you're going to look at it, and you're going to look at it various different ways, and you look at one particular area of it where you look at it and think reality TV that we've discussed. There's one episode on Stargate where they basically make out the reason they want to basically tell the general population that the Stargate doesn't exist is to make it into a TV series. So they basically put legitimate reasons into the show that would basically people that were in it realised. So maybe at some point
Taylor, if you're on the Xbox, can you get off it for a second, please? You're buggering up the radio show.
All right, Mark, we just heard that.
And I thought I was on mute.
And welcome to the Dark Mirror Show.
Oh my god, I can't get the stuff these days.
No, what I'm saying is there's this particular episode on Stargate where the alien was actually the film producer who was basically in propaganda to the masses. It was a bit like, watch this hand while over here something else is going on.
Yeah, it was a very clever one. I remember the one you were about.
Exactly.
And it was almost saying, we're actually doing this, but no, you're going to see this.
Exactly, and that's the whole thing about it is maybe if you look at it and you read the evidence and you go into it, you're going to go down that rabbit hole that you're going to come out and think, hang on, maybe they were trying to say one thing but actually doing another thing to distract people from actually what they actually is going on, which is the thing about that. So,
well, you can understand, I think, why it creates so much conspiracy theory surrounding it. I mean, God, if you've got just about everything splattered in there, haven't you? Which is, it's fodder, pure fodder for the conspiracy theorists.
We love a good conspiracy on the Dark Mirror Show, don't we?
We do love a good conspiracy. We do. Skype flipped out and it went conspiracy. It sounded like you came from the deep south. I was just waiting for you to go. You got a real pretty mouth, boy. But I'm glad you didn't.
Well, we kind of do like a little conspiracy theory on the Dark Mirror Show. We're actually coming to the end of the show, guys. One thing I would like to say is, while I looked into this, I looked into Uri Geller. Because he was supposed to be a big part of it. He was only looked at for 5 or 6 weeks in the whole programme.
But he's made a lifestyle and a history of being experimented by the CIA, FBI, every possible organisation, Mossad, and when he hasn't.
Have you seen his Rolls Royce?
He's done the job that he's done, but he was only actually
had a Rolls Royce
doing experiments for 5
He had a Rolls Royce with every possible spoon that's supposed to be bent on it,
covered on it,
and allegedly the experiments he did take part in were highly suspect. And on that note, we'll come to the end of the show.
I like his haircut.
Thank you so much for joining us, guys.
I'd just like to say, I'm glad I'm back. Sorry, I was seriously ill over the last show, so I couldn't jump on and shout aliens. That's why I've done it several times, just to A, annoy you, and B, just get it out there, into the pot.
And Mark, last week I did take your mantle, and I did end the show by shouting aliens. So
You did.
you were there.
Awesomeness. Thank you. High five.
I was there in. Basically, I was remote viewing you, saying that.
It was. Now, the next time the Dark Mirror Show is back with you is on the 8th of March, and we are looking at unidentified submerged objects.
Yeah.
Oh, I know, right? I'm giving you boys plenty of fodder for your alien shouting, is what I'm doing.
Research.
There's more to aliens than that, because there's a lot of evidence, and that's going to be a very interesting show, because I've already done the research on that, and there's certain structures underneath where they said there was civilization before the seas dammed and moved and stuff like that, like the water planning goes. And you can look at it and you can see these structures, blah 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 blah. So these submerged places like Atlantis, potentially, there's a lot of factors.
The research is already done that.
Well, if you want to look for Atlantis, me and Paul have already done a show on that, and we found it. So don't worry about that one. We've covered that.
Yeah,
but if you want to listen to unidentified submerged objects, you need to be here on the 8th of March. And if you've missed any of our shows, just pop over to our YouTube channel and click like, share, and subscribe.
Oh, you've got that down to a T, haven't you?
Oh, I love it. Jolene will be live on the Parasearch Radio group page tomorrow at 6 p.m. for her Q&A. So don't forget to join her for there. And Sunday, I am on the Spirit Dimension at 9 p.m. with the lovely Cheryl McGregor. And we are going all spiritual. We are talking spiritual things that are coming through on the collective that are very, very apparent at the moment. But to find out more, you need to tune in at 9 p.m. on Sunday, right here on Parasearch Radio. On that note...
No, before you end, or you could remote view and watch it at a later date.
Now, try not to remote view me whilst I'm in bed, because Kerry's done that before, and it's a bit rude, quite frankly.
Exactly.
Yeah,
just get on that remote.
We all know what happened.
On that note, thanks, lads.
Did that? His way went great.
Good night, lads.
Good night. Oh, good night. Hello, good evening, and aliens.
And sweet cheeks, love you lots.
Thank you for listening.
Love you too,
Don't
honey.
forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.